Okay, good morning everybody. I think we'll make a start. I'm usually introducing someone who's standing there, but today I'm introducing someone who's in there. That is, I'm very pleased to welcome Rob Peregoodoff from UBC, University of British Columbia, and he's kindly found a time in his schedule to speak to us all the way from Canada. I believe it's yesterday there, so welcome Rob. He's going to talk to us about digital assessment and particularly about assessing large groups of students in digital environments. He's got a great deal of experience in the field, and I'll hand over to Rob. Thank you very much for coming along, Rob.
All right. Thank you very much. So the first thing I'll do is just a brief sound check, both for those in the room, but also for those online. Is my audio okay?
Yep, that's fine, Rob. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think at this point, what I'm going to do is I'll launch into my formal presentation. I'm going to try to get through this at a relatively quick pace. I will do my best to address questions on the fly, but if I miss them, I do want to make sure that we'll have an opportunity at the end for you to grill me on our program and our progress over the years in this space. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change to my screen here. So this is always the part where the technical people hold their breath. And we do that. Now you should see breaking of the ice. There we go. And now what I will do is I'm going to launch here. Okay, so assuming that that's all gone well, I'll launch. So as Stuart implied, the presentation today is in the picture itself. And one thing that I do want to stress, at Sauder, we are not doing remote digital exams. A lot of people are obviously very interested in being able to do this. It is somewhat of the holy grail in this space. When I've done these presentations globally, inevitably someone asks that question. What I want to stress is that's not the game that we're in. We are in 1,200 students sitting in our lecture theaters, taking assessments, what I'll call the old-fashioned way, the major difference being they're using their laptops now. I would also like to thank Dr. Shane Dawson, who I'm very happy to see is in the room there, for putting this presentation together. As you all know as educators, it's always a good idea to state your objective at the start of a presentation. My objective here is to show you what we do with our project in such a way as to get you interested, but hopefully not so good that I don't get the opportunity for an invitation to come to Adelaide. Through my brother, who worked many years with BHP Billiton, I've had the great pleasure of visiting Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth, but have never had the opportunity to come to what I've been told is the jewel in the crown. So hopefully one of the takeaways from this is an opportunity for me to come and meet with you personally. Also, I would like to say we do the full gamut of other online assessments and other types of assessments. So I'm happy to answer questions about our group presentations, about more subjective written work. We have the full gamut, but as has been implied, this presentation today is focusing on mainly large-scale online exams. So I do also like to start with this disclaimer. As Shane will attest to, I'm never one, political correctness is not something I suffer from. So especially when presentations are recorded, I always like to put this disclaimer up. You may or may not know that have been following the problems that University of British Columbia has been having in the media recently, so it's always good for me to put this up at the start. By way of quick introduction, I recently, when I graduated with a Bachelor of Education degree in mathematics and computing science, I took it to Swaziland in southern Africa, where I spent 4 years teaching math and language arts in Swaziland. Amazing experience. From there, I returned back to Canada, spent 4 years teaching on an Aboriginal reserve, First Nations college. Again, an amazing experience. While there, I completed my master's degree in educational technology. Then moved to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, where I spent 6 years in the classroom teaching at a college there, and it's there where my career took the 90-degree turn into what is now called educational technology and support, and what led me to landing here in Vancouver with the Sauder School of Business at UBC. By way of quick introduction, if you're not aware of UBC, there's some of the numbers, the faculties that we are dealing with, our global ranking that seems to be very important to a lot of people. I still don't get it. In terms of the Sauder School of Business that I work for, these are some of the numbers that we're working with. The key in this slide that I'll point out to you are the 2 accreditation labels at the bottom. When I launched this project back in 2010, the dean at the time, Dan Musica, really had no idea what I was doing or why I was doing it. But the only thing he said to me was, don't risk our accreditation. Some of the other data, some of the other numbers that I'd like to share with you before I sort of launch into the formal part of my presentation is, currently to date, we have done over 28,000 individual online exams and only lost 1. And at some point in my presentation, if you're interested, I'd love to tell you the story as to why we lost that 1. Another couple of key numbers that I think are important. We have over 85% voluntary usage of our learning management system. So at UBC, we're a Blackboard shop. I understand there you guys are a Moodle shop. I'll say right at the beginning, my presentation is LMS agnostic. There's nothing special about Blackboard that makes what we're doing particular that could not be replicated by another platform. Also, I think it's important to know that we are over 99% voluntary device penetration by our students. Starting in about 2012, we noticed a dramatic increase in the number of students walking into our lecture theaters carrying laptops, now tablets, and in some cases large mobile phones. This is not mandatory. UBC is not a mandatory device institution, nor is the Sauder School of Business. But it's obviously relevant when you are launching a mandatory online final exam where every student must come with a device to write the exam. We don't give students the paper option anymore. So it's here that forms what I'd say the core of my presentation. And before I get started with the specific subjects there, normally when I do this presentation face-to-face, what I like to do is get a gauge of who I have in the room. I like to ask questions, sometimes using something like clickers or polling device. In this case, I'm going to ask the questions, and rather than actually take the time to work through the logistics, I'm just going to tell you why I ask the questions. So the first one I ask is, how many people in the room are A, instructors, B, administrators, C, ed tech staff, or D, IT staff? Now, Tracy has already kind of given me a heads up that the majority are going to be instructors in the room, which is great. I also like to know if there's senior administrators in the room. I understand that there could be. That's great. Ed tech staff for sure, and I hope a few IT staff. Those of you that are IT staff, I'll forewarn you, you tend to not like to hear my presentation. Another question that I like to ask is, how many people in the room, when you hear online exam, automatically think multiple choice questions? And I'm going to assume that the majority of you are nodding your head saying, yep, I think online, I think multiple choice. The next question that I also like to ask is, how many in the room think of cheating automatically when you hear of online exams? And again, I'm going to assume that there's a few nods of heads. The last but not least is the question of how many in the room believe that their specific subject matter would not lend itself to an online exam environment. And again, I'm going to assume that there's probably a few people in the room that are nodding heads. Maybe Tracy, you can jot those names and numbers down because I'd like to get in touch with them later on. I always love a good challenge. So moving into the formal part of the examination, or sorry, the formal part of my presentation, what we tend to do is give sort of audience participation in terms of choice. The 4 purple selections tend to be the primaries. The 4 of the brown or yellow ones at the bottom tend to be, if you're interested, I'm happy to address those. So I think what I'm going to do is jump right into my presentation, and I'm going to make an assumption that the first thing that you're going to want to hear about is security. So I'm going to jump into that piece. And most importantly, I think, is to stress what we don't do at Sauder, having conducted over 28,000 online exams. We do not do any lockdown browser technology. We do no restriction whatsoever. When the students log in with their devices, they have full access to the internet. They have full access to all of the resources and everything available. Now, let me clarify that. Not all of our exams are open book or are open internet. What it implies, though, is that it is a trust agreement. We are not forcing the restrictions upon the students in either their devices or through any other sort of lockdown technology. The other thing that we don't do is this restrictive individual perspective towards assessments. The majority of our instructors still insist on what I'll call 50% density. So in the exam theaters, the students are every second seat, fairly traditional. Our more mature instructors now, through the use of the technologies and the randomization built into the technology, they're now taking exams with 100% density and also building in what I guess I'd call traps. Some of our more mischievous instructors build in answers whereby if students are looking at each other's screens, we will know that they're looking at each other's screens. A, they'll get the wrong answer, but B, we'll be able to filter out and actually tell the students, have a quiet word with them to say, you should probably keep your eyes on your own screen. Of real interest now for us, and this forms part of what I'd call the future part of our presentation, is we are actually considering live synchronous in-exam collaboration potentials. So the complete opposite of what you see there, where the paper in front of the eyes. Now, what's important is, having said what we don't do, I think it's important to stress what we do. First and foremost, invigilation. Absolutely critical. The entire program is based on invigilation that is robust and on task. One of the stories that I think I would share, and I don't know if you have this, but in our current paper-based exam environment, we tend to hire PhD candidates on campus who, for the vast majority, bless their hearts, they come in, they sit down, but at some point they pull out their phones or they pull out their dissertation, they pull out something to read, and they're really there in body only, but they're not there in spirit or mind. Well, that we cannot, we do not abide by. We have to have active invigilation. Because out of that invigilation, we also do extreme data tracking. We use a tool here at UBC. It's called TrueSight, and that's TrueSight. It's by a company called BMC. And this tool wraps around our learning management system, and it's built for network performance and monitoring, but because it does such high level of tracking, if we have a suspicion that a student has gone to an inappropriate website during the exam, all we need is their student ID number, and we can go pull these logs out, and we can absolutely show if there was or was not inappropriate behavior during the exam. The last piece to this is consequences. One of the interesting things that has come out of this project is we're far more objective now in terms of when we put, I don't like to say the word cheating, let's call it misunderstandings. When we have misunderstandings and we do an investigation, when we put the data to the disciplinary committee of the university, it tends to be pretty clear cut. It's far less the he said, she said, or maybe we saw them do something. The evidence is pretty clear, and the consequences are severe. So I'm pretty confident, and actually what I'm going to do now, I'm going to leave this notion of security there, and actually I think jump to the data perspective. That tends to be the next most popular topic in the presentation. So what is on the screen now is the results of our largest exam to date, and that was 1,266 students. This is in March of 2015. And what I'll share there with the data, and I think it's important to highlight that we had this data 5 minutes after the exam finished, and the 1,266 students left the exam theater, is through our average and our standard deviations. These are raw numbers. These numbers have had no adjustments whatsoever, no curving, no changes at all. This is exactly the data as it was when the exam finished. And from our side, we do not see any significant cheating or misunderstandings, as I like to say. Now, am I going to be naive enough to claim to you that there is no cheating occurring during our online exams? No, of course not. My simple response is there's always been cheating, and there always will be cheating. It's a matter of how we can get better at designing our assessments in order to deal with this. So the next piece is to deal with what we call the next part of the data that's important is the access logs. Now, these access logs are individual to students, and what they do is they show us the progression of the student through the entire exam process. This data is important to us because for a number of reasons. Most importantly, it gives us a correlation of activity during the exam. For example, when we have a technical situation, we've had students' laptops literally start to smoke during the exam, or they go into the Windows blue screen of death or the Macintosh beach ball of doom. If that occurs, this access log gives us that correlation. It shows us that during the exam, yes, something occurred to the student. More and more instructors are starting to look at this data and recognize its value in terms of exam design. So in the traditional paper-based world, it's what students hand in after 2.5 hours is a culmination of that 2.5 hours with little or no understanding of their progression through the exam on the exam questions. Having this time spent on each question, our instructors are finding more and more valuable as they design their exam questions. I think that's something that Shane would probably be able to articulate even more or extrapolate even more on. Having this data is the important thing for us. The next is the summary data that we get that's automatically generated from within the learning management system. And this is some of this feedback that is so valuable to us in terms of creating better assessments. The highlights on this chart tend to be the discrimination data and the difficulty data. And again, I'm going to assume that the majority of you understand what discrimination data is. I'll quickly explain that it is a normalization curve whereby the system converts the lower quartile and the upper quartile's performance on the entire exam as opposed to an individual question. A high discrimination value tells you that the best students on the overall performance did well on that question. A negative discrimination value would tell you that somehow that question confused the good students and the poor performing students guessed, and that is why they did well on that particular question. difficulty level is just a simple measure of performance on that question, but more and more of our instructors are taking this data as important because it is good for future exam design where they can actually make that intelligent question creation that I'm sure all of you are doing on gut instinct and through trial and error. Now we have objective data that can really help with how hard was that exam. Here I'm going to go into more on the IT side. I'm going to jump through this relatively quickly. This isn't my expertise. I work with the IT folks, but I think it is important that you understand what's happening behind the scenes in terms of running an exam for 1200. The screen you're looking at now is what we call our wireless router heat map. This, before we launch any exam, particularly for 1200 students, we always check in with the wireless folks for a status of our building. And of course, what we want to see is we want to see green across the board, knowing that we don't have any routers that are having any sort of a technical issue. This is a picture of the wireless network monitoring room. Every exam that we run, we now have IT staff on call monitoring the entire system, so that if there is any sort of a wobble, if there is any sort of a glitch, if there is any sort of a gremlin in the system, I can make an immediate phone call to the key people who can tell me whether or not it's an anomaly or it's something more significant that we need to plan for. Obviously, scheduling 1200 students, bringing their own laptops for an exam on a Friday evening, it's a one shot. You do not have the luxury of rescheduling later on down the line. This is some baseline data that we capture through our network analysis tools, and this just gave our IT folks some assurance that what we were doing in terms of launching an exam of this magnitude and this scale, that they were comfortable that our system was capable of handling the load pressures. Because one thing that we've learned, the launching of an exam through the LMS is one of the most processor intensive things your learning management system will do. So we run, and it's here where I'm going to go off the politically correct stage a little bit and say, when we first launched this, we did not ask our IT folks for permission, nor did we ask for their blessing. What we did was I met with one particular instructor who was gracious enough to give me 15 minutes of one of her class times. We told all of the students to bring their laptops in. We gave them a fake exam. And on the count of 1, 2, 3, we told them all to push go. And we didn't crash the system. Our IT folks were able to pull this data out. That was for 250. And we now regularly run online exams for 600 to 800. We don't even blink anymore. And this past spring we ran for 1200. The IT folks are now being proactive and have brought our vendor in, and they have done a load test and have certified us for up to 2,500 concurrent online exams. I'm knocking on wood because I hope we don't have to go to that high. The administrators in the room usually are interested in this slide, and I can't give you firm data that I would share publicly or what I take to the bank, but what I can give you as back a napkin is we currently work with the number of $10 per student per exam that we're saving the institution through simply our printing costs as well as our marker costs. Now, it is important to note that we do not give all of those $10 back to the finance department. What we do now is, particularly at midterm exam time, is we convert that marker, post-exam marker time, to individual student consultation time. In other words, after midterm exams, of which of course they're marked over the weekend, so they tend to be given back to the students by the following week, students can book a 15-minute or half-hour individual tutoring time to go through their exam individually with a TA to get better, hopefully better understanding and better feedback on their individual performance. So that tends to take up anywhere between $5 and $7 of the cost savings. Okay. I'm going to jump back. And next, what I'd like to do is jump into the logistics piece. And by logistics, what I mean is, what does it take to get 1,200 students ready for a 6:30 p.m. launch? And I tell you, it's the thing that has caused me the most sweat and grief over the years, and it still does. The simple description I'll give you is, first and foremost, we always book 30 minutes on either end of the exam theaters. In the old days, I don't know if you're the same, but in paper, for a 6:30 exam start, you would open up the exam theater maybe 20 after 6, 25 after 6, and fairly confident that you would have all of the students in the room settled and ready to go. We open the room 30 minutes prior, and we go through a 3-stage countdown. So for a 6:30 start, we open at 6 o'clock. By 6:10, I want to have all of the students with their laptops open, and I want them connected to the UBC Secure Wireless Network. That's my first milestone. Is my wireless network functional? At 20 after, I want all of the students logged into the learning management system, and I want them viewing the exam entry screen. I want to know that my learning management system is ready and able. I don't have any issues on that side of the shop. And then we will provide a password to students, and we do a staged launch. So we don't start 1,200 students at 6:30. We'll start usually in batches of 100 to 200, staggering every 30 to 45 seconds. And we do that with military precision. Again, so that we can try to reduce the load on the server of presenting all of these exams. This is a screen that a paper that we put on top of the document camera in every exam theater. I'm not going to go through this in detail. I will share it with Tracy and the rest of the group. The piece that I would just emphasize is each of these points, there's a reason behind them. There's a background. So I'm more than happy to follow up with Tracy if she has any particular questions about why we put this up in front of the students and what its purpose is. The next one is a sign-in sheet that is also mandatory for all of our online exams. I understand it's a bit ironic for a fully online exam. Why do we have a paper sign-in sheet? Some great reasons, and this I will go through in a little more detail. First and foremost, just getting the students to sign a document is always a good thing, saying that they are who they say they are. We also use this document for photo ID checks. So when the invigilators are going around the exam comparing student face to photo ID, they'll put their initials onto this piece of paper to show that indeed their ID was checked. Another reason is to put the conditions of the exam for the individual instructor. So for example, it's here where I show you item number 5, academic integrity is expected. Candidates guilty of the following or similar dishonest practices shall be immediately dismissed and shall be liable to disciplinary action. So again, we're not enforcing any of these conditions, we're just putting it as part of our exam integrity culture. Another important part to this is some of our instructors do what we call a hybrid exam. So along with this sign-in sheet, there will be 2 or 3 or 4 pages stapled where instructors will have students draw diagrams, where instructors will have students show work, where instructors will have students write, I want to use the word appeals, but you know the proverbial questions that we all get during an exam where a student is confused and wants to ask some sort of clarification. we use these papers as the place where all students can write question 5. I thought the wording of this was inappropriate based on the notes that you gave in class, or whatever the case may be. We do not entertain any more instructors being in the exam theaters and answering those individual subject matter questions. The last, and what I think from our side, one of the most important functions that these sign-up sheets give us is to address technical issues. So during that 30-minute warm-up time that I described, it is inevitable that we have some students who have technical issues. Despite our best efforts to prevent, it always occurs. Now we have we have a computer lab reserved that has 68 seats in it. So if a student has a problem during the exam launch, no problem, we pack them up, we move them to the computer lab, and they can start the exam at their leisure. If a student has a problem 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 1 hour into the exam, we have technical staff, not invigilators, in the, not one per exam room, but one per hallway, who will come in and troubleshoot and diagnose the student's laptop. In many cases, it's simply restart the browser, re-log in, and they can start their exam again. In other cases, the student's laptop has gone into the Windows update or the Macintosh Beach Ball of Doom. In that case, we want to pack the students up and move them to the exam theater. They don't get any extra time on their exam. So my staff will write a note on this paper saying, student lost 5 minutes due to transfer to computer lab. And the integrity of that note is really important because thankfully, 9 times out of 10, the students don't feel slighted or cheated by that transfer to the computer lab. But if they do, the instructor has a written record of it occurring, and 99 times out of 100, the instructor and the students have always been able to come up with an amicable and agreed upon solution. And for the most part, we stay right out of those conversations. Oh, Mark, just saw your question. Access to PowerPoints. Excellent, thank you. We have, through the generosity of an $80 million construction project, 100% power distribution in our buildings. And I'm sure that many of you are looking around saying that is the Achilles heel. Absolutely, that is the Achilles heel to a large-scale online exam. I'm going to ask Mark that we suspend that to the end of my presentation where I will talk about our future. I do realize that that's a luxury that not many institutions have these days. Moving on to the last piece, and this is what we pass to all of our invigilators. And I've stressed earlier the importance of the invigilation. This is the document that all of our invigilators get in terms of prepping them for the job that they're going to do. Again, I'm not going to go through this in detail. Happy to share that with the team there in Adelaide, and happy to follow up with any of the individual specific points as to why we include that for our exams. Okay, so I'm about 30 minutes in. Talked about security, shown you some of the data, just covered the logistics of launching this type of an exam. So what I'd like to do now is go into what I hope is the real meat of my presentation. And this is the exam design, the question design. Because it's here where, as an educator, my passion, I hope, really comes in. Because, simply put, this is where our future lies. By way of lead-in, for the most part, traditionally we have been, for a large-scale exam of this nature, we've been stuck at the bottom 2 layers of Bloom's taxonomy. We can exam for knowledge and, to some degree, comprehension. And it's here where I'm going to switch out a little bit and talk about our model, our security model. if as an institution we were enforcing the lockdown model where we were not allowing students to access any other resources than the screen, I probably wouldn't be very excited about doing it, because it would imply that that is the level of assessment that we are going to stay at. If we don't allow the students sort of what I call a real world experience, how can we move forward in terms of education and what the internet is what the internet is giving us as a disruptive force? For us at Sauder, we are, and I'm not going to say 100% there, the road we're on is trying to get up into these application analysis and synthesis layers of Bloom's taxonomy through our assessments. I see a question from Wing about the more recent revised Bloom's taxonomy. Yes, Wing, absolutely, we are working with the revised. I pulled this one up purely for demonstration purposes. So now what I'd like to do is move into a series of examples of exam questions. Unfortunately, I can't give you samples of all of the questions that we have created, simply put, because the instructors have not given me authorization to put their questions up on to the public web. This question that I put is obviously very simple. It is a multiple choice, and it has a diagram embedded in it. What I would point to you here, though, is replace that diagram with a video. Replace that diagram with an audio podcast students need to listen to. Replace that diagram with a JavaScript applet. And I think you would then begin to understand where once you know that you're working in what I call an HTML live environment, whereby the question is not restricted to just text, it opens up literally an infinite world of possibilities. One of the best questions that I ever created was in my time in Dubai, where the eureka moment of embedding a Java applet. It was a basic intro to calculus course, and one of the things that we were doing was getting the students to use a bicycle design applet, whereby the students had to manipulate the conditions of designing a bicycle. So I'm talking about the seat length, I'm talking about the wheel dimension, I'm talking about the chain size, and if the students manipulated those conditions accurately, they were then able to answer the question properly. So Joe, you've asked a question about embedding. All of this is browser-based. So we're not relying on any individual technology dependent on the students' laptops. Good question. Everything we're doing is dependent on the browser that the students are using. I'm going to move down to the next question. This question tackles the problem, particularly in the quantitative side of the world, of the multi-part mark type question. And what I can stress is this is a fill-in-the-blank question, and we use fill-in-the-blank questions extensively. I could show you an example where we've created a tax form using multiple fill-in-the-blank questions. I could show you examples where we've created for our Faculty of Medicine a question where the students had to fill in a patient diagnostic summary form. I could go on, but it's in this type of yeah. Let me move on to the next one. I'm struggling a bit trying to articulate my words right now. This is a database question, and the important part to say in this particular question is there are multiple answers. Those of you that are familiar with access and database creation, you know that there are multiple correct answers. So the students could use any of the A to H blocks to put their correct answer in. The instructor here just really appreciated having the data capture in a much better way for his markers to actually mark this particular question. It is here that I maybe will stress, not all of our exams are 100% objective marked. We do have many exams where the instructors will be putting in paragraph questions, and the students are filling in 500,000, 2,000 word entries. And that is being marked by a human being. It's not being marked by the computer. There's two sides to this in that subjective paragraph entry that I'll surface and I'll raise. Number one is how the markers appreciate not having to read handwriting. I think we can all agree that that is a major problem. The second one, and this was a surprise to me, how much students appreciate being able to manipulate their text paragraph questions. In other words, many times we've had students who are typing out 200, 300, 400 words who then suddenly realize that what they've just typed actually belongs in another question. So in the current paper world, they like to do the old draw a diagram. Please mark this part over here. Of course, in this space, the students can just do a simple copy paste. They also do like to, they do appreciate being able to craft their answers, being able to use the WYSIWYG editors that are now available in paragraph type questions. So I'm just going to stop and check for a question. Static text diagram based. Empirical evidence, this works better. Good question, Sven. We are launching a research-based project to exactly address what you are asking. We've got connections with a group in the Free University in Berlin, also with Jeffrey Crisp there in Australia, as well as Shane. I can't remember the other gentleman that you put me in touch with at University of Queensland. We are talking about launching research in exactly that space. Difference in typing skills for long text-based answers. No. Don't deal with typing skills, Mark. Okay, I'm going to come back to the slide deck and give you this question, because this is one that one of our profs who is stepping out further into the boundary has come up with. So at first glance, this looks to be an Excel spreadsheet. It isn't at all, in fact. He's entirely mimicked the HTML build of an Excel question. He is actually using the question type that is a scrambled sentence type question. At some point, I'd like to show you this question live so I can actually click and show you what this does. I put it here hopefully to stimulate more thought in terms of what is possible in an HTML live environment. Okay, so I'm going to come over and take a look and see some students have problems with different word versions. For our exams, Jiang, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, students are not using Word at all. Students are using the native text editor built right into the learning management system. Siva, how are mode effects accounted for? What are the implications for equity? Siva, can you expand on that a little bit? I'm sorry, I'm not understanding mode effects. Okay, while I'm waiting for that, I am going to now offer the four softer side of my presentation in terms of these topics of culture, bruises. Bruises are some of the areas where we have had problems. I'm not going to lie to anyone. We definitely have. I'm happy to share those stories. Culture really talks about the culture that we have at Sauder that I've been able to take advantage of in terms of how did we get to this scale, because change management has been interesting in that space. Maybe I could ask for a little bit of response, maybe from Tracy or from some of the online folks. What of those culture or bruises would you like me to expand on? Okay, I got a culture, and I also got a bruises in future. Stuart, what would you like me to do?
Hi, Rob. Are we ready to throw open to some open questions now in the
Yeah,
room?
you know what?
Because if anyone has any questions, okay. Well, I'll start with a question, just a quick one. What's been the response from the UBC students so far to this? Have they enjoyed it?
So currently, solder is the only faculty that is at this scale. So rather than UBC, I would restrict it down to say solder. The key metric that I have always tried to follow is we have not once made the student newspaper. I've been waiting for it, but we haven't yet.
Okay.
Absolutely, we have had a small proportion of our students who have gone into our counseling offices claiming that their poor performance on their assessments is because we were using computers. So
Okay. And the response to that was?
we go back, or we encourage our counselors to go back to the data across the entire semester. So we encourage our counselors to take a look at the assessment data up to that point. And if you have a student who went into a midterm exam with a D average and scored a D on the exam, the conversation tends to go one direction. We have had a situation where we had a student going in with a B average who failed an exam, and I was brought into that conversation to dig a little deeper. It turned out that that student actually just had a terribly stressful day going into the exam and had technical issues, none of which were so severe that she raised her hand and asked for assistance. So it was a valid case of a student having a technical issue. For that particular student, the next exam, we gave her one of our institutional laptops to use because we didn't want her using the same laptop for her next exam. The next exam went very well.
Okay. I wonder how that correlates with the usual stresses of taking traditional exams. I imagine it's around about the same amount of students stressing.
Yeah, and I should probably stress that in nowhere of any of our courses do students see this type of assessment environment for a high stakes exam. They have all done take home homework, take home assignments that is exactly the same platform. So we never let a student take an exam and it being the first time that they've ever seen the environment using their laptop for this type of environment.
Okay, fantastic. So, as a layperson, I'm interested in the marking. How does this reduce? I imagine it's one of the largest advantages in this system. Is marking automated? Is it faster? Does it plug
Oh,
straight into Blackboard? What's the marking process?
absolutely. And that is, and as part of culture, one of the pieces that I would stress is when we approach our faculty to gently nudge them into this online game and this wacky thing we call the interweb, I don't purport to be a person who's going to improve the learning experience or who's going to provide the magic panacea to make all things rosy and wonderful. With our faculty, I simply say that we should be saving them time. Because what I've learned in my 6 years at a major research institution, there is nothing more valuable than faculty time. Now that when we get a faculty member into the online exam game the first time, we tend to take their existing exam structure. So they'll literally come into my office, they'll hand me a copy of their old paper exam, and my team and I will build it out, we'll transfer the medium. We'll show them what it looks like. We'll encourage them to run one instance of their exam in that existing structure. After they've seen the benefits, after we've shown them a full cycle, inevitably they always come back saying, okay, now what can I do with my assessment design now that I'm in the game? And that launches into the question of how do we change time? Because for us at Sauder, and this is stepping, I guess, outside of this particular presentation, but for us at Sauder, our stated aim is to improve the student experience by giving them more contact with faculty. And of course, you can't enforce that, but if we can encourage a faculty member to provide more office hours for individual student consultation because they're not spending 20 hours with a red pen in their hand marking, we think that's a good thing.
I think most academics would agree with you, Rob. So I'm just going to ask if there are any questions in the room before we start looking at some questions in the chat log. So has anyone got any questions in the room? Here we go. I'll just get you to speak in the mic.
Just a quick couple of, do all courses have exams? And the second question would be, have you used this system with, say, postgraduate course students?
Okay, good questions. Number one, no. Absolutely not mandatory that all courses will use exams in general. We have a number of courses that have gone away completely from formal exams. Also, our target audiences tend to be our larger core or required courses. The sections that are 250, 300, 500, 800, and in this case 1200. That tends to be our major clients. What we have found that's interesting is those faculty who teach in those core courses, inevitably the following semester or the following year come back to us for their fourth year course or their graduate level course, asking, hey, can we take a look at this for my 40-seat course or my 15-seat MBA course? And can we raise the bar in terms of the type of assessment? Now, the other question that you asked, I think I just addressed it. We are using online assessments in our MBA programs. The one program that we're not is our PhD program, and I think that's more by, I guess, right fit. So we haven't had any participation from our PhD program in this.
Thanks, Rob. Any other questions in the room? There's a couple over here. Just hang on a second. Over to Mark. Thank you.
G'day, Rob. My name is Mark Dowd, online educational designer with UniSA. I got a question. Did you ever look into having a bank of devices which you kind of hand out for assessments and then take back from students? And if you did you look into locking down those devices so you eliminate students going to other sources? But I understand you are using BYOD at the moment.
Very good question. Can we hold that to the future? Or should I jump into the future now? You know what? That's such a good question. I'm going to jump into the future.
Jump in, Rob.
We are currently exploring the creation of a company. The company's job is going to be to drive up to the institution's door 2 hours prior to the start of the exam and unload carts. Each of those carts will contain 100 tablets. Those tablets get laid out into the exam theater as we always did with paper. The institution is going to pay for the use of those tablets. Sauder doesn't want to own 1,200 tablets, nor do we want to maintain them. I don't know of any educational institution that wants to. There would be a fee for use. Once you move into that space, now that you can control the device, you can control the entire assessment experience. And it's where I would create, if I go back to the vision of the prison model, we should be able to put the bars where we need them, and let them walk through where we want them. We should also be able to track the entire assessment experience. We could be doing things such as maybe a little help button up in the corner, that if the student presses that button, they get a little pop-up window that gives them a hint on that particular question, something that they just forgot. But as a result, they're going to receive a 25% deduction on their mark. Maybe we do something as radical as creating a virtual collaboration space in the room during the exam. So a student can go into that room and ask his or her peers, hey, I'm having a problem with question 22. I don't understand the wording. Can anyone help me? Because one of the interesting things that we believe is going to happen, and we've seen this with take-home exams, people do not rush to help students who have not helped themselves during normal class time. Simply put, by taking that device back, we can completely change assessment metrics and the entire assessment experience. And that, to me, is really where things are going to get interesting.
Indeed they are. Tracy, did you have a question? Okay, so we'll look at some of the questions from the chat log if that's okay. I'll just have a little look. If we could look at, we'll start from the bottom and work up, I guess. Joe's question, have you used this format for exams where students are not collected in the one place?
Okay, so currently we are all in an invigilated space, Joe. So we haven't changed the geographic location. They're distributed around the campus because to get 1,200 students, but they're all under an invigilated condition. We are exploring, I do consulting work with other institutions and they are asking me for this remote aspect. And I think it's probably best that I don't go into that right now. I'm happy to sort of go offline and share with you some of the things that we're looking at. Ultimately, what I would stress is for us, and here's where I'm going to kind of go on the wacky end of the spectrum. As with newspaper, as with music, as with television, as with, you name it, the internet has been a disruptive force. I believe that higher education and education in general is now in the sights of disruption. There's knowledge and access to information is ubiquitous. We've all heard that. There's one piece of the value chain that we still own, and that's our degree. The integrity of that degree is based on some metric of quality. And we have to evolve in order to stay relevant in the near and I think distant future. So we have to solve this.
Thanks, Rob. There's another question. There's a number of questions from Siva, but I'll just choose one of them. I appreciate an understanding to how short responses and essays are marked. Is feedback automated too?
So for short responses, yes, we have automated that. There is something called Perl scripting, which you can use to do some pattern recognition and some basic word recognition that we're looking at. We do have automated feedback, so when the students see their exams back, they are given a response that you chose this answer and it is incorrect because of this condition, so we do try to do that as much as possible. And of course, for subjective questions where they're writing out paragraphs, that feedback is given directly from markers. And in some cases it's written, in some cases it's done in these individual consultations.
And again, there's an implication for a reduction in time for academics there, I guess, which is great. There's a question from Jiang about training for the students. I think you touched on this before, that the half hour prior to the exam, does that constitute some training for the students?
No, that's absolutely only sort of device preparation time. Training for the students is always starts right at the beginning of the semester where the instructors will give them a sample assignment. And it usually is never for marks. It's usually just a, hey guys, if you haven't done this before, this is how minor and major assessments are going to be conducted. So it's there where students can take their laptop, they can launch a quiz, and if they are having major problems, they can go to our Learning Commons and receive technical support. If it's serious technical issues, they'll come to my unit and we'll take a look at their challenges. If their device is somehow so wacky that it can't be solved, we have laptops available for sign out. And that also solves the problem that we're not a mandatory device institution. So we have students who show up and say, you never told me to bring a laptop, so I don't have a laptop. What are you going to do about it? And the answer is go to the library and sign out a laptop for the exam.
Okay, thanks very much. Any more questions in the room? I think everybody is done. I would just like to ask you one last question, Rob, before we sign off, about who should we be reading on this? Who's a good resource, apart from yourself, obviously? Because I think there's some interest in developing this here in the K-12 space as well as in the tertiary space. So who should we be looking to for inspiration?
Yeah, so the name has returned to me. It's Dr. Matthew Hillier at University of Queensland. He has also some colleagues at in Singapore. Another gentleman is, and his name is going to escape me, but it's the Free University of Berlin, and it is their educational technology support unit. They are very well advanced, and they have done some writing as well. I unfortunately haven't. It's something on my to-do list. The other institution would be, oh no, and now the name's going to escape me. While I was there in Berlin, it was in Switzerland. What is the university in Switzerland? Anyone in the room can help me there? What's the esteemed, prestigious university there?
Okay, thank you very much, Rob. I'd just like to, if we've exhausted all the questions in this room, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you very much for making time in your schedule to speak to us. It was very interesting. And we have a final question. Hang on a second.
Yep.
Thank you, Rob. I'm working in the Year 12 space, and I'm just wondering if you have any contacts or if you're aware of any work that's happening in the secondary sector.
So unfortunately not in the public sector, but I do have in the private school. So if that is still interesting to you, then I can put you in touch with some people who we've been working with as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Rob. I'll get that email organised. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank you very much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. It's first thing in the morning here, so hopefully the experience has been good for you, and we'll get a hoodie, a UniSA hoodie in the mail to you presently. And hopefully we'll see you down here one day soon.
I will wear it proudly, and agreed. I hope to be there. As I recall, Shane does owe me a pint or two.
I'm sure he does, and he's usually good for it. All right, thanks very much, Rob. Bye now.
Okay, thank you very much.